My dear students, as we were discussing about the employment testing, within the employment testing, test validation is a very important procedure. Without proper validation of any testing procedure, it is not a good idea to use any of the employment tests. So test validation is actually the uniform guidelines on employee selection procedures need to be adopted. If you are not using the uniform guidelines for the different testing procedures, obviously it would not be validated. Why we need to use the uniform guidelines? That is a very important question which we need to answer. The primary purpose of the uniform guidelines is to provide a framework for determining the proper use of test and other selection procedures. Not only test, whatever the selection procedures we are using to select any of the employee in your organization, you have to validate it. You have to use the uniform guidelines for any particular selection procedures, including employment tests. So when these tests would be served as a basis for employment decisions, why we need to use the standard guidelines, why we need a uniformity of the guidelines, because these guidelines would be served as basis for the employment decisions. And if you would not use the uniform guidelines, the employment decision would not be true, would be wrong. And if it would be wrong, obviously you are just wasting the organization's time and cost. So you need to be very particular about the use of the test and their validation procedures. What is test? The term test covers all formal. It must be formal. If it is informal, it is not called as a test. It would not be called as a formal test. It must be scored. It must be quantified, or standardized techniques of assessing job suitability. So employment tests are commonly used to assess the job suitability of any particular applicant in the organization. And tests would determine that a person is suitable for current job or not suitable for the current job. Other selection procedures are also used along with a test. And other selection procedure refers to the application forms. It refers to the employment interviews covering education and the work experience. It refers to the reference checks and performance evaluation. Even the training programs we are used in organizations are also used for determining the job suitability. So selection procedures include employment test, it include employment interviews, it include application forms, it will include reference checks and a lot of other stuff which we may add into the selection process. And all these employment procedures need to be standardized, need to be validated. The guidelines are also intended to preclude the use of any selection procedure that has an adverse impact on the hiring, promotion, or other employment opportunities of members of either sex, of any race or ethnic group. Again, equal employment opportunities issues would come in the test validation. If the guidelines are not standardized, if they are not uniform, and if they are discriminating any particular group or ethnic group or sex or any member of the community, then it would not be validated. It would not be properly validated. So we have to consider the concept of equal employment opportunities in the testing validation procedures. So just assume when two or more substantially equal selection procedures are available, means two similar or equally substantially selection procedures are available, then employers are expected to use the procedures that has been shown to have the lesser adverse impact on members of any protected group. You know that members of the protected groups are also the part of the selection procedures. And if you are using the selection procedures which has an adverse impact on the members of the protected group, obviously such kind of procedures would not lead to the better results. It would be discriminatory selection procedures. So we need to consider the components of equal employment opportunities in the selection procedures, particularly in the employment testing. These guidelines apply to the private employers, public sector employers with 15 or more employees, to state and the local government organization, and to the most employment agencies, labor organizations, and contractors, subcontractors of the federal government, provincial government, and the local governments. So no one is exempted. Validation studies are required as a means of proving that certain test or other selection procedure really works and does not unfairly discriminate against groups of protected individuals. If the test or if the employment testings are discriminating the individuals of a protected groups, obviously such kind of employment tests need to be avoided in the organization, because it would lead to the discrimination, and it would lead to the discrimination in the employment decision, which would not be considered true for any of the particular organization. So you need to keep these factors in mind. The key to proving validity is the job relatedness. Whether your test or any of the selection procedure is related to the job, that's great, and evidence that the test is a proven indicator of a job success. So two components. One is a job relatedness, that the test or any of the selection procedures related to the job, and second, that test is a proven indicator of the job success. If you would include these two components in employment testing, your test would be validated.